Okay, now we're going to talk about the rest of the cell structure. So this is this continuation of our cell structure video, or part two, we could say. So in the last video, we talked about the plasma membrane and that all cells are surrounded by this plasma membrane, or also called the cell membrane. We also talked about plant cells have cell walls, and then all eukaryotic cells have this internal membrane-bound structure called the nucleus, which contains the DNA, the genes that control all cell functions. And that outside of that are structures called ribosomes that make the proteins. So that's a good start. Now let's talk about some of these other structures, like this blue folded membrane out here. Let's talk about that. This other structure called the Golgi apparatus, vacuoles, lysosomes, and even this big tail here called the flagella. So let's discuss some of these structures right now. So first, just outside of the nucleus, we see this folded membrane. It's called the endoplasmic. Endo sort of means inside. Plasma, again, it's kind of fluidy, liquid membrane. Reticulum. Reticulum is sort of like a structure or a scaffolding. And you'll notice part of it is called the rough ER, and part of it is called the smooth ER. So again, there's rough and smooth. So the rough ER, again, when you look at it under an electron light microscope, looks rough. It's got all these little dots on it, okay? And those dots are ribosomes. So again, that's where proteins are made. And the smooth doesn't contain ribosomes, so it looks smooth under the electron microscope, but it does contain enzymes, and those enzymes synthesize lipids, those enzymes destroy toxins, and do a number of functions. So there's a lot of stuff going on there. It's not just kind of dead membrane space, if you will. Another important function of the smooth and rough endoplasmic reticulum is it's sort of like a transportation system whereby the genes, the genetic information can come from the nucleus down here to the ribosomes, proteins can get made and then get transported, and a lot of synthesis and transportation occurs in the endoplasmic reticulum. Located just next to the endoplasmic reticulum, so here's the nucleus, here's our endoplasmic reticulum, is this structure called the Golgi apparatus, discovered by a guy named Golgi, an Italian guy, and this is kind of the packaging center. So we said that ribosomes are like the factories, and this is like the shipping center, UPS or FedEx. This is where those proteins will get modified and packaged up into these little membrane-bound containers. So notice there's a receiving side, that's where the proteins come, then they get packaged up and they sort of get sent out on this side. And the structure that does that is called the Golgi. Sometimes it's called the Golgi bodies, Golgi apparatus, or just Golgi. It's the packaging center within the cell. Some of the other structures that get packaged up in the Golgi are frequently found in white blood cells. If you think about white blood cells, they are the things that kind of go around and have to eat up bacteria and foreign particles and destroy them. Or within all cells, we have cell structures like dye, like this mitochondria fragment. And that garbage has to kind of get picked up and recycled and digested. So we have these structures called lysosomes. To lyse means to digest or break up, and some means body. So these are the membrane-bound structures that have digestive enzymes. And sometimes we'll call this like the stomach of the cell, where digestive processes take place. So white blood cells, they take in a bacteria, they fuse it with lysosomes, those lysosomes digest the bacteria and destroy it. Or dead structures like the mitochondria get fused with a lysosome, lysosome digests all the molecules within there, and those can be recycled and reused. So lysosomes, again, are sort of the digestive or the sort of recycling center within the cell. Again, these membranes all are sort of interconnected and work together. So we have our nucleus with our DNA. It sends out genetic messages out here to these ribosomes where proteins can get made. Some of those proteins might get shipped up to the smooth ER and function as enzymes. Other proteins might get sent down to the Golgi and get packaged up, maybe like insulin or human growth hormone that's going to get secreted from the cell, and then that can be secreted from the cell. Or some of those enzymes might get activated into a digestive enzyme, packaged up into a membrane, and become a lysosome. So again, all these structures work together for overall cell function. They're not sort of individualized components, but they sort of form an overall pattern of working together to perform all cell processes. So let's look at a couple more of the structures within the cell. Okay, so another one we said that was prominent in plant cells and less so in animal cells, although still there, is the vacuole. And this is an example of a large central vacuole, which we said was in plant cells. In the cell lab, you're going to be looking at some plant cells, and again, they have a cell wall. Notice the cell wall is this kind of clear structure right here. And then within that are these vacuoles. These are actually called amyloplasts. They contain starch, and we add the iodine to the potato cells so that it turns them purple, and they're easier to see. So vacuoles might store water in a plant cell, or in animal cells, they might store food or waste, but these are like the storage containers within the cell. They store things. Another structure we're going to talk a lot about in terms of cell energy is the mitochondria. Mitochondria is like the powerhouse of the cell. So we said, you know, like if a cell's a city, that city needs energy. And we have power plants where we take fossil fuels and we burn them and convert them into electricity. Well, your mitochondria takes your food molecules, right, like glucose, carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, and converts them into the energy molecule ATP. We'll talk about that in a couple of weeks, but that is kind of the electricity of the cell. This is what the cell uses directly for power, and it's generated in this structure called the mitochondria. Notice mitochondria is plural, mitochondrion is singular. It's like criteria, criterion. So don't be confused if we see mitochondrion or mitochondria. It's just single versus plural. Okay, we talked about one structure found in plants, not in animal cells, right? And they're the green structures that you're going to look at in the cell lab, right? Those are called chloroplasts. So chloro means color, plasts are a type of plastid within cells, a unit. And again, they're green because they contain the molecule chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is the molecule that absorbs sunlight and then allows the chloroplast to convert that energy into the energy of food molecules. It makes glucose, and then that glucose gets converted into starch. So the chloroplast is the site of photosynthesis in plant cells, again, not found in animal cells. Okay, the last thing, we're going to look at a short video called The Life of a Cell. In that video, you're going to see all these membrane-bound structures, these organelles, being sort of carried by proteins. So here's some proteins, and they're kind of pulling them along this series of tracks or networks, and those are the cytoskeleton. So cyto means cell, skeleton is an internal structure like your skeleton. So this is sort of the internal structure or a highway system within the cell whereby organelles can get moved around and transported. It's important. The two main types of structures in the cytoskeleton are microtubules, which literally means little tubes, and microfilaments, which basically means little threads. Microtubules are going to form a structure called the spindle during cell division. We'll talk about that in a couple weeks. And microfilaments are those things, muscle fibers, that pull against each other and allow muscles to contract and give you movement. So those are part of the cytoskeleton. Again, the two fibers, microfilaments and microtubules, move things around internally and can even pull against each other and allow for movement. And then within these two structures, there are microfilaments that pull against each other and cause a beating sensation. So one of them is one long whip-like tail. It looks like that. Others, like this paramecium, have a lot of shorter structures that all beat together and allow the paramecium to move. So those are called flagella and cilia, and they allow for cell movement. So an example is a sperm cell with a long flagella that allows it to swim. And then cilia allow the paramecium to swim. We also have cilia in our lung cells. They actually don't move the cells, but they move the mucus out of the lungs. So when you're sick, you produce excess mucus, and then the cilia move it out into your throat where you can clear all that phlegm, and that's how your lungs keep themselves clean and avoid infection. So now I want to kind of go over and have you look at 4 different cells and see if you can figure out what kind of cell is it. Is it a plant cell or an animal cell? And then what's the structure in there? And this is from the cell lab. So hopefully you've already seen these, you've already labeled them, and this should be hopefully an easy activity. So let's try. All right, first cell, look at them. Notice the structure of a cell, and then there is a structure in there. So what type of cell? Plant or animal cell? And then what's that structure? Right there. Okay. All right, go ahead and write that one down. And then cell number 2. This should look like something you've seen in a cell. Okay, so there's one part of the cell, and then within the cell are these internal things. So what type of cell is that? And what are those internal structures? Third cell, okay, again, here is the cell. Again, cell walls are harder to see, but then the internal structures are these green things in here. So what kind of cell is that? And what are the structures in there? And then the last cell. So we have these structures right here. And then what is that structure right there within that cell? So go ahead and see if you can figure out what those 4 cells are and what those internal structures are. And you can just say plant or animal. If you remember the exact type of plant or animal cell, that's fine too. So that's it for cell structures and function.